Today on FlyWire, we're going to review the recent crash of a twin Cessna 310R model. It departed North Las Vegas and was trying to divert to Henderson Airport after an engine failure. I don't think it's as simple as you might think on the surface, so stick with us on FlyWire. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire, we're going to review the crash of a twin Cessna 310R in southwest Las Vegas in late October 2020. When I originally heard of this accident, of course, there wasn't much accurate data out there. But now that the NTSB preliminary report is out, there's also footage from a security camera that is significant, I think, and really changes the character of this particular accident. Data is important. VASAviation, VASaviation on YouTube has done a really nice job of tracing the ATC radar and radio exchanges of the event. They did a video on it. And I'm going to use some of their video on this video. And I'll put a link below to the video, and I suggest you go there and watch it. And watch other stuff on their channel. They do a really great job. And you should check them out. So this pilot was from San Diego, and he operated two businesses. One was a real estate firm, and the other was a Part 135 air taxi business called Air Charter Express. Apparently, he had been operating the air taxi business since approximately 1993, and he appears to have flown that 310 pretty much the whole time. So he was an experienced pilot. He had flown to North Las Vegas Airport the day before the mishap, and on 29 October, he departed KVGT, that's North Las Vegas, at 0929. Ish, and intending to return to KSEE, Gillespie Field in San Diego. The airplane departed from North Las Vegas on 12 right at about 9:28 local time, so a little bit earlier. The takeoff and subsequent handoff to departure did not highlight anything abnormal until the pilot checked in with departure. So let's watch a little of that video right here.
101 Golf, traffic approach.
101 Golf. Las Vegas departure, twin Cessna 101 Golf. 2,800 on a heading of 220. We'd now like to go to Henderson.
101 Golf, Las Vegas approach, ident, McCarran altimeter 3021.
3021.
1 Golf, your radar contact 1 mile south of North Las Vegas. You were slightly broken. Did you say something about Henderson?
Affirmative. Like to change our destination to Henderson now.
Remember 01 Golf, roger.
So the tower directs 101 Golf to switch to departure at 2928. And at 2932, the pilot checks in with departure and requests a diversion to Henderson in his first sentence. What's important to note is the pilot makes no mention of the engine problem. Presumably, the left engine had failed at this point, prompting the pilot to decide to divert to Henderson. He changed his plan. He wasn't going to San Diego. And what is unknown is just when that engine failed. I'm hoping that NTSB nails that down, but it's not actually important to the accident itself. But given that only 4 seconds passed between acknowledging the switch from tower and checking in with departure with his diversion plan, it is highly unlikely that the engine failed. It is highly likely that the engine failed before the radio switch, and frankly within about a half mile of the runway. The first red flag that goes, this is the first red flag that goes up for me. This, in my view, is a serious mistake. The second red flag is the pilot did not declare an emergency with the departure controller. His tone and his demeanor on the radio was that everything was copacetic and he just wanted to fly to South Las Vegas instead of San Diego. Frankly, this is a serious problem, and we're going to talk about it in more detail in a minute. But from the radio exchange, it does not appear that the flight was conducted as an IFR flight. Kind of important here. The controller didn't issue headings and altitudes, and he directed the pilot to stay clear of Class Bravo airspace and avoid McCarran airspace. That's Class Delta. It's a 5-mile circle around the airport itself for a towered airport. The issue is that if the flight was IFR, then the controller would have been very directive about headings and altitudes and things like that, and he would have been tuned into this unusual request that was different from the flight plan.
November 01 Golf, I need you to remain outside of Bravo airspace. You can't turn that way. That's right in McCarran Straps area.
Okay, 101 Golf.
For a VFR flight, he just wanted the airplane to stay out of conflict with his IFR traffic, stay out of the controlled airspace. So totally understandable from the controller's point of view. He did not know there was an emergency. He can't divine what the pilot's thinking. You can tell by the flight path that the airplane did avoid McCarran somewhat, but he did not stay clear of Class Bravo. Surprisingly, the airplane flew a 5 nautical mile arc around the McCarran class Delta, and it wasn't until almost 6 minutes into the flight that the pilot first mentions that he had to shut an engine down. It sounded a little like he was getting nervous at this point.
And departure Twin Cessna 101 Golf, any chance to direct to Henderson? We have to shut down one engine.
01 Golf, yeah, you can see direct Henderson at your discretion, and contact tower now on 125.1.
125.1 for 101 Golf.
This point. But he still did not declare an emergency. After asking permission from the controller to turn direct to Henderson, he did that, and then the airplane, but here's the thing, the airplane never climbed above 2,900 feet, and as it turned southeast, it began a gradual descent. Presumably, the pilot had intended to stay below McCarran outbound traffic by staying at 700-foot AGL, that's above ground level, on his flight around Las Vegas. To me, that's another red flag. At 9:31:30, the pilot turned towards Henderson. During the portion of the flight around McCarran, he had held his airspeed very close to 117 knots, within a couple either way. And when he turned south, his speed dropped off to 91 knots when he started descending. The winds were 210 at 3 knots. And frankly, the winds were not a large factor in this accident or in changing this ground speed. The airplane descended an average of 185 feet per minute for the next 2 minutes and 45 seconds. It also slowed from 115 knots to 86 knots in the time just prior to the crash. And 15 seconds before the crash, the airplane was approximately 100 feet above the ground, and the last hit was at 80 knots. This is another red flag. Take a look at this video. This video is from a bystander, and it shows the airplane pass by very close to the ground, and you can clearly see the left prop stopped. It's undetermined, the video is not clear enough to see whether it's feathered or not. From the sound of the good engine, as the airplane passes by the observer, it does not appear that the right engine, the only one producing power, was turning at a very high RPM. At this point, the airplane was at 86 knots. It continued slowing, and within 8 seconds, the airplane was 80 knots, just as he was passing that bystander. The stall speed for this airplane, for the 310, is 79 knots. More importantly, the VMC, or minimum control speed, for the Cessna 310R is 80 knots. And what this speed means is that it is the minimum speed at which the flight controls have enough authority to maintain directional control with one engine inoperative and one at full power. The last ADS-B hit was at 9:38:16 and just above ground level, and he was at 80 knots. The airplane was at 80 knots. I want to show this video, this one here. This is the security video that I mentioned before. It's hard to see the airplane, I'll admit that, but you can see it, and you can see it traveling easterly in a shallow descent. You can see the airplane roll to the left, and with an increasing rate, continue the roll, ending up nose low, upside down, before it disappears from view. That's that intervening building. And then the fireball appears right after the impact. This was a VMC roll, not a stall. And he didn't land under control. With the power on only one engine, the airplane will roll into the dead engine below VMC. And the only way to recover from a VMC roll is to reduce power on the good engine, lower the nose to gain airspeed. The VMC roll and recovery is performed in training in for the multi-engine certificate as a standalone event, so everybody who's done multi has done it. But frankly, without putting it into context and training to it regularly, I think a pilot would be hard-pressed to correctly recover from a VMC departure. And close to the ground, all bets are off, okay? Because you don't have that altitude to trade for airspeed. It's gruesome to watch this video and know that 2 human beings just perished in that airplane. But frankly, we can't turn a blind eye. We can't say that one of these days we'll know what happened. And frankly, without a cockpit recorder, we'll never know what was going on in that cockpit. We'll never be able to divine what the pilot was actually thinking. What is important is for us to find the lessons we can learn from this mishap. Why the engine failed is not important. It did. What's really important is what happens next, okay? I think we can learn some very important lessons from that. And maybe, just maybe, it'll save a few lives. So let's look at the red flags. If you remember, the first red flag for this mishap is the engine failure after takeoff. When the pilot checked in with the departure controller, he has to go directly to Henderson. This happened only seconds after North Las Vegas Tower switched him to departure. The demeanor and radio calls, again, were calm and unhurried. But the engine failure had to have occurred within that half a mile of the VGT runway. The prudent choice would have been to stay with Tower and land immediately. A simple right turn, which is into the good engine, and he would have been on downwind for 1-2 right with another right turn to line up, and he'd been on the ground in seconds. But from what I can tell about the speed and the altitude from the ADS-B data, the airplane performance did not appear to be severely degraded. And therefore, I think the left prop was probably feathered. We don't know that. NTSB will probably tell us that in their final when they examine the airplane. So the straight line distance between North Las Vegas and Henderson is 15 miles, pretty much right over McCarran. And the Path 101 Golf flew was approximately 20 miles and just over 12 minutes of flying, vice, a little less than 8 if you went straight to Henderson. The issue is that the right engine failed within a mile of a perfectly good airport. He already had dealt with the engine failure and had come up with a plan to divert to Henderson when he talked to the departure controller. Maybe he wasn't even thinking about McCarran airspace being in the way. I don't know. Why he didn't just land at North Las Vegas, I don't know. The safest bet all around was to land at the nearest airport. And if it ever happens to you and you're flying a multi and this happens, land at the nearest airport. The second red flag here possibly reveals what was going through the pilot's mind. Okay, listen to that radio call again.
101 Golf. Las Vegas departure, Twin Cessna 101 Golf. 2,800 on a heading of 220. We'd now like to go to Henderson.
He's not excited, okay? It makes me wonder if he does regular engine out practice with the failed engine set at 0 thrust. I think he does, because it's not a big deal. He's done it 100 times. But I don't know that, but I'm speculating. While the training is a good idea, it can also lead to a false sense of what the reality will be with a real engine failure. To the pilot's mind, this was obviously not a problem. He handled it before. From my perspective, this is a serious problem. This pilot knew he had a problem, but he decided not to declare an emergency, okay? What was the downside to declaring an emergency? Worst case, you're going to have to write a letter to the FAA describing the event, and that's it. An engine failure easily rises to the level of a bona fide emergency, definitely in a single, but I think also in a multi. The best thing about the declaration is that it gives you priority and pretty much means you can do whatever you need to do to safely land the airplane. I've got a B-25 emergency story that I was going to tell in this video right here, and it happened right here at Las Vegas. But I realized that I'm going to go run long, so I'm going to tell that story in a video that I'm going to do right after this one. So check back with FlyWire for that story shortly, about a week. As long as you don't act recklessly and endanger others, you get cover when you declare an emergency. No big deal. In a twin-engine airplane with only one engine turning, I'd say you're marginally controllable position. Time is not on your side. Declare an emergency and land as soon as possible. This is not a hit on you as a pilot, okay? It's more of a kudos for judgment for taking care of a serious situation. The next thing that stands out to me here is the altitude the mishap airplane flew. Here's where declaring an emergency would have helped, okay? He could have climbed to a good altitude, call it 4,000 feet or better, 3,000 feet above the ground. That would have been my choice, following the path the pilot chose. Of course, I wouldn't have done that. Altitude equals options, okay? If the operating engine starts to act up, then you can trade altitude for time in the air to sort things out. In this case, the pilot began a descent when he turned to intercept a straight-in course to the Henderson runway. Perhaps in his mind, he normally starts a descent when he does that. I don't know. He did start the descent, but doing that when he was only 700 feet above the ground and 4 miles from the runway, that was a terribly bad idea. In my experience with engine failures in twin-engine airplanes is that once you are stabilized, you can maintain altitude at a reduced airspeed. But once you begin to descend, you cannot regain that altitude easily. And you're going to put a lot of stress on the engine to try to get back up to that altitude. Always a problem, always a risk. So if the engine was acting up and he could not maintain altitude, it speaks directly to bypassing 2 good airports. First with North Las Vegas, and the second was McCarran. With emergency authority, he could have landed at McCarran. Okay, the controller didn't want you there. I don't care. It's the safest thing for me. That's where I'm going. By flying straight ahead and if he flew straight ahead and made a slight right turn, he'd been on short final 19 right. Just a little bit longer of a flight time than if he landed in North Las Vegas. He bypassed 2 perfectly good landing opportunities that would have involved minimal flying time. All of this would have required the pilot to take command, I want to put that in quotes, command of the situation. This is a foot stomper here. The emergency declaration would have given him the authority and the priority to execute a plan to land safely. It would have communicated the dire situation to all involved, no questions, including the pilot's own mindset. And that's the key here, his perception of what's going on in the situation he was in. The action the pilot took, constituted danger to himself, his passengers, and all the people, that were below him on his flight path to the southeast. I guarantee you that Chuck Yeager and Sully would have declared an emergency in this situation, and most importantly, they would not have given up the only energy they had to play with until they didn't need it anymore. Altitude was mismanaged in this mishap. In my mind, no question. Don't make that same mistake. Okay, the last red flag in this mishap chain was the handling of the airplane itself. Put yourself in the pilot's seat for the last few minutes of flight. For whatever reason, once the descent was started, the pilot began slowing his airspeed. Perhaps this was an unconscious reaction to getting closer to the ground. I don't want to go there, so you keep pulling back. Perhaps it was a problem with the remaining operating engine. It doesn't really matter. In the first bystander video, the engine does not seem to be making full power. If it was capable of doing so, the pilot was flying into the proverbial box canyon. The slower he got, the less power he could use. Remember VMC. But at the same time, the lower he got, the more power he needed. That's the square corner he was built himself. So how do you like that for two sayings here? Put that in my vocab session there. But what is apparent, frankly, is that in that second security camera video, is the pilot tried to stay in the air by trading speed for altitude until the laws of physics caught up with him and resulted in a VMC roll-induced departure. Okay, it's likely that the pilot had not thought this problem through. And if you were in that seat, what would you have done? Commonly, this is the VMC roll, and a realistic scenario is not done in training after you've gotten your ticket, your multi-engine ticket. But there's no way to add energy back into this airplane and stay in the air. There's no way to make that measly 4 miles to Henderson. You don't have altitude, you can't use the power. Your only choice was to make a forced landing and hope for the best. One thing in the pilot's favor at this point, as to earlier, was that in front of him, he could have had a lot of areas he could choose to do a landing spot. It was the desert, there was big roads, stuff like that. unlike the rest of the busy populated Las Vegas town that he had just flown over. The problem here is that the pilot was not prepared to change his plan of action. He had determined in his mind early, boom, I'm just going to fly to Henderson, without really thinking about the logistics of that and how long it would take and other things like that. And that, in his mind, that was his only option. The energy bucket was rapidly running out and was not going to allow a landing at Henderson. That's the reality of this accident. Very quickly, he had to change the plan and land where he was. His mind could not accept the reality he was faced with, and he just kept pressing with his plan until he lost control. And I already told you about the laws of physics, so anyway. The cardinal rule here is that the pilot violated, the cardinal rule that the pilot violated was that he did not fly the airplane all the way to the ground. He did not take command of the situation. He did not come up with a viable plan, communicate it, and execute it. Land as soon as possible, land in control, don't give up your altitude until you have to. Declare an emergency, take priority, take command, and do what is required to get safely back on the ground. Remember a previous video I talked about landing the airplane in this situation. It doesn't have to be reusable, but the objective is to get you on the ground, so you are. I hope you enjoyed the video and you can incorporate some lessons learned so it doesn't happen to you. Fly safe, stay ahead of the airplane, and most importantly, stay in command. That's why you get paid the big bucks, right? So if you liked the video, give me a like, hit the subscribe button. You can find it down there. It's there, that's kind of what it looks like. And hit the bell also if you'd like notifications of the next video. If you'd like to support the channel, I'll put a link to FlyWire Patreon page down below. I really appreciate that. It helps me do these videos. And I just want to say thank you to my Patreon supporters here. I appreciate your supporting me. And watch for a couple other Patreon-only videos I'm going to put out. Speaking of the next video, hang on for my B-25 engine out Las Vegas story. I think you're going to enjoy it. It speaks exactly, I think, to what happened to this Cessna 310. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on FlyWire. Click this link for the latest upload. Click this link for whatever YouTube thinks you ought to watch. Or you can click this link to subscribe. Thanks for watching.